Well, ladies and gentlemen, here it is, episode number 91 of Material Issues. I'm Mark Hershberger of Pop Detective Records. I'm over here on the East Coast, South Jersey to be exact. And joining me, as always, my very good friend from the West Coast, president of the International Pop Overthrow Festival, which is international all over the world, Mr. David Bash. Just fresh in from Boston. Hey, David, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good, Mark. How are you?
I'm fantastic in this 68-degree sunny weather here in South Jersey. I don't know what's going on with the world, but my dog and I will take it.
Yeah, there's always a few days, mostly during the winter, but there's always a few days when New York is warmer than California. Which again, during the winter, that almost never happens. During the summer, of course, it could, but not the winter. And this is one of the. I remember I started college at Syracuse University, and I remember there was one day probably in January. I was looking at the weather from around the country, and the high in Syracuse was going to be the highest high of the entire day. I'm thinking Syracuse, for God's sakes, that's upstate New York in January. How in the world is that possible? But for that one day it was. Then probably 2 days later it was -10. Who knows?
Well, and before the show started, I had my dog out for a nice long walk. And of course, every dog in a 10-block radius was out. So it took us a very long time as Ches was meeting and greeting all his buddies for an extended period of time. But you know what? He was enjoying himself immensely, and so was I. So we had a great time. But speaking of great times, Ben Gollum out of L.A. is starting work on a Chris Bond documentary. Chris Bond, as he's mostly known for, is with his work with Hall & Oates and producing a lot of their albums. But he also did production work for Klaatu and their Endangered Species album. And so Ben's going all over the world. Hey, Nigel. Nigel. Just funny. I'm sorry. Nigel checked in. I'm sorry.
I caught the connection. Obviously, Nigel was making plans to be here.
He was making plans to join us tonight.
Yeah, I wonder if he's ever heard that before. Probably never.
But Ben, Nigel said, I know. But Ben was a great guy, and it turns out, I don't know if you can see this. I just found it. It's a DAT tape from 21 years ago when I interviewed Chris Bond, and evidently, video and or audio of him speaking about anything is extremely rare. So it may make its way into the documentary. I'm not sure, and you never know when you keep these things. So that was very cool, and of course from Cool Cat Records. Fringe Benefit.
Oh, you got yours. I don't have mine yet. Wow.
Yeah. The 1977 album from these guys, the one and only album that Ray put out on Cool Cat.
And, I like to think that we were responsible for this because if we
inside
hadn't
the booklet, it says David Bash. Yes, it does.
Only as my name? Oh, that's
you were the one that reached out and said you should do it. So
but it's our show. But I believe me, I'm very grateful that Ray decided to do. John Borak. Hey, Andy.
It's an amazing album. It deserves.
It is. And they said it really was never on anybody's radar because you can't put a UK pop band on a Southern rock label and expect anything to happen. One of the biggest misfit of any act and label that I can think of. But, fortunately, we can do things now here at Material Issues. So, and I'm also, hey, issuers, whoever said that, good to see you. I think I may know who said that, but I'm not going to say if I'm wrong. Dukes to there you go.
There you go.
And I'll be addressing that directly in a little bit, but I forget where I was going with any of this.
Now we were just talking Fringe Benefit on the Southern Rock label and how it was one of the biggest.
Right. Yeah. I know what it was. Joe is putting together a Fringe Benefit band to perform at IPO Liverpool at the Cavern. When I could say in May, but it might be in June because our dates are May 28th through June 4th this year.
Right. Right.
But
That's
either
awesome.
way, it'll be so glad. I mean, I'll be so glad to see this happen. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Well, speaking of awesome, certainly our next guest is he fits into that category.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
He certainly fits into that category. You know, when you think about bands, the first member to come to mind is usually the lead singer, and the second member could be the song. If it's a different person, could be the songwriter. But certainly in every band, there are more people, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Certainly that was the case with XTC, and in large part it was due to their lead guitar player, who happens to be our guest. XTC is one of the most beloved pop bands of all time, deservedly so. Such a great body of work, and not only that, but their alter ego, the Dukes of Stratosphere, and this is one of my favorite things in my collection.
Wow.
The complete and utter Dukes. Which
I
of
love
course
it.
I had to get that as soon as I saw it. This guy, our guest, is responsible, I believe, partially responsible for naming the band, and of course his contributions were invaluable as they were to XTC throughout their career. And he's done a lot of other stuff. He's played with a lot of different people: Peter Gabriel, Amy Mann, Martin Newell, who's again a very underrated and very XTC
And one of my favorites. Yes.
Yeah, and several others. And not sure who that is, but okay then. So, without further ado, would you please give a huge welcome to Lord Cornelius Plum himself, Mr. Dave Gregory.
Greetings, everybody. Hello.
Good
Hi,
evening, Dave.
so
all
much
the
for being
way,
here.
all the way from Swindon, which is we've got we talked briefly before the show. We've got all different time zones going on, from David in the LA area to me over here in South Jersey outside of Philly to you over in Swindon. And it's kind of funny because XTC, you always knew they were a Swindon band, and when I talked to you a week ago or so, and I was like, you're still where? And you said Swindon. I was like, well, he stayed in Swindon, which is wonderful. And Swindon,
we all stayed in Swindon. We're all homeboys. We're all here. Even Terry Chambers has returned from Australia.
Oh, he
has
has
domiciled
nice.
himself back in his birthplace. So we're all four of us are still local citizens.
When you think of Swindon, I just automatically think of like a tiny little town, a little. But Swindon's not that small. It's a couple hundred. But it's a couple 100,000 people, correct? It's about what, an hour or so outside of London.
Depends how you're traveling, but yes, on the train it's about an hour.
It's I mean, 200,000 people these days is a small town. It's so strange.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, 200,000 now is significant.
Yeah.
Are you in the same place you bought with your early money, or have you upgraded since then?
No, this is actually, I've lived in this house since, let me see, 1994. So I've been here nearly 30 years, 29 years.
Nice.
And I've been thinking about upgrade because I'm running out of space now. I've got so much stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And, I'm not getting any younger. And, as long as I'm still motivated to do it, I'm ready to move upwards. Most people my age are downsizing, and I need more space.
Absolutely. You can never have too much stuff, Dave.
I agree.
If you ever come over to my house and you see my record collection, you'll know what I'm talking about.
David recently upgraded to a house because he ran out of room in his apartment, decided to get married just so he had a place to put all his stuff.
And I'm running out of room now, too. Hey, Gary.
It doesn't take long.
Dave, when you say you have a lot of stuff, Dave, are you a record collector, CD music collector, instruments? I know you have a lot of guitars.
Got a lot of guitars. I got a bunch of records.
Not bad.
And the 45s are upstairs. And I hurt my back the other week lifting one of the tubs of 45s. So I've got a bad leg, but I've still got the 45s. That's the main
still
thing.
got the 45.
And, you know, it's just, yes, and you're right. Upstairs is all my music stuff, guitars, little recording studio, and a bed. The other rooms are full of clothes and redundant music stuff I don't use anymore that I can't bear to throw away.
Yeah, that's kind of it. We talk about collecting a lot with a lot of our guests and things, and it really is. It's you know, it's your own thing. It's the history of your life. It's what makes you happy. And if you enjoy surrounding yourself with, you know, as David and I do, we've got, you know, you're seeing one 1/100th of David's collection right behind you. It's absolutely amazing.
Not quite.
That's what it's all about. And it's neat to see that you've got a room full of albums and 45s upstairs and probably more guitars than I can imagine.
And dear God, yeah. Dear God. I'm going to be doing that all day until you tell me you're sick of it.
Well, let's Dave, let's go back a little bit. We always like to talk about the origins of our guests, and I know you came from a household that was musical, but not so much rock and roll. What got you started in music, so to speak? Were you a piano lesson person? Did you did you have to go that route?
When I was a kid, you're thinking about, I'm talking about the 1950s now. We had like BBC Radio light program, the Home Service, and the Network 3. And on Network 3 was all the classical music. And my dad loved classical music, and so did my mum. They both they couldn't be doing with any of this pop rubbish. And American rock and roll, that was right out. You couldn't, but not that the BBC played very much of that. So all there was to listen to were a stack of old shellac 78s that my dad had collected since he was a kid. Mostly classical. There's a few show things like Oklahoma and I can't remember the others, but it was mostly classical. And then we eventually, I think my mum and dad had thoughts that I was going to be a classical pianist. So as soon as I was big enough to sit on the stool and reach the keyboard, I was sent off to piano lessons, which I was really mad keen for. I would have been 9 years old, and my dad had bought this amazing piano. It was a baby grand piano that took up most of the living room. And I couldn't wait to have a go on it. You know, it was as simple as that. It was a new toy. I couldn't wait to have a go on it. So I was more than happy to go for the piano lessons. And taught me to read music and learn about all the rudiments and understand notation and how the keyboard worked as a means of understanding music.
What was it like seeing Elvis for the first time?
Well, I can't remember seeing him for the first time, so it can't have had a big effect on me. Let me see, it would have been 1956, so I would only have been 3 or 4 years old.
Oh, okay.
So it probably would have, had I seen him, it probably would have not registered. However, I've always said, if I'd only heard Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry in those days, that would have turned my head. But I didn't hear them until, maybe the early 60s when pop radio started to filter its way into our house.
Right, and you got a little older, and you were a little more aware of what was happening, instead of just your parents or hearing what your parents wanted you to hear or what they were playing because it was there. It was very, very much the situation in my household. My mom and dad were, classical and show tunes and things like that. But it wasn't until I got into the car and in the back seat, and they were flipping through the radio in the car, and all of a sudden I heard like Dizzy by Tommy Rowe or something. I go, stop. I go, what's that? And that's the only way you get exposed. Then all of a sudden you get old enough to say, can you put that station on again?
Now, you certainly were old enough to have seen the Beatles when they first hit. Now, as Americans, of course, they were the heads of the British invasion, and it was a huge, huge, huge deal. They didn't invade the UK. They were already there. And I know they were really big very quickly, but what kind of impact did they have on you as a music fan and as a musician?
it was just incredible. You couldn't. I would have been 10. I just had my 10th birthday when "Love Me Do" came out. It was just this little blues shuffle thing. It wasn't anything special, but there was something in the voices that drew your ear in. It wasn't a dynamic, grab you by the scruff of the neck and give you a good shake. That wasn't that sort of song at all. But there was something charming about the way it was sung and the groove and everything. And it just thought, oh, these guys are from Liverpool, which is this sort of seaport in the north of England, miles and miles from where I was living. And then I remember that Christmas, we had a really, really hard winter, just dreadful winter. And the snow fell and there were these huge snow drifts everywhere. And the country froze up for about 2 months.
Wow.
Because I think there were two serious winter storms that just refused to thaw out. And I can remember hearing that harmonica of "Please Please Me" coming out of the radio, out of the snow, out of the "So Are the Ice." And it was just always reminds me, every time I hear the intro to "Please Please Me," takes me straight back to that hard winter and just the way the music seemed to come out of the snow and ice, and the thaw slowly happened. It took a few weeks, but again, that "Please Please Me" was another giant step. Yeah. And they went zooming up the charts. Everyone suddenly wanted to know who these guys were, and
when you talk like that, and we've talked to a lot of guests from that period, and they have the same kind of very visceral reaction to that, those moments when they heard the Beatles like that. Like David and I, coming from the same age group, when I heard "Life Begins at the Hop" or "Making Plans for Nigel," I had that kind of oh wow moment for something so very different. Do you have a sense of how you guys made people feel with those kind of tracks as you felt when you heard the Beatles? I mean, do you have an understanding of people going, it was a oh wow moment?
From what I've just talking to you guys, for example, I can hear how that actually happened for a lot of people, but I can't relate it directly because, as soon as I heard the Beatles, immediately all my friends at school, we wanted to be the Beatles. We just had to be wherever it was those guys were. That's where we wanted to be. That's what we wanted to do. It was just the most amazing thing to be a Beatle. You were king of England. And to have gotten to a point where I was lucky enough to join a successful band and make records and have a career and go on TV and influence, it wouldn't have had the same effect looking at it from this side of the mirror, if you like. It's a difficult thing to quantify. We were just busy doing whatever we could to stay afloat, really. And you have to remember that when those records were released, we weren't selling that many records in England. And I don't think we had a distribution deal in the States at that time. There might have been.
No, your records were all put out in the US around the same time.
They were put out, but it wasn't like heavy rotation on the.
Not until MTV, no.
No, exactly.
Although there was a club in my city. I lived in a town not far from New York at that time, and the DJ was very cool, and he used to play XTC stuff all the time. And I think that may have been my moment, like Mark's moment with Making Plans for Nigel. Mine was always 10 feet tall. But I heard that song and said, wow, this is pretty melodic stuff. I need to find out more. And he played that among others.
Was that the American 45 that we put out in 1980? Because that came out. We went and re-recorded 10 Feet Tall specifically for America, because it's mostly acoustic guitars on the Drums and Wires album.
It was actually the Drums and Wires version.
Yeah.
He would play album tracks quite a bit too, and that's where I first heard it, and it's like, wow, okay.
So you're knocked out by the Beatles, and so there's got to be a progression at that point from mid 60s to 1979 when you joined XTC. What's the 13 years there involved with Dave as far as learning the guitar and doing things that made you become who you were by the late 70s?
Well, I think that's to just sort of gloss over the 70s is really, I mean, we need another interview to cover that period of music, because that's the greatest music they ever met for me.
Yes.
As much as I loved the Beatles and everything, that was a huge impact, changed everything for everybody. Right. By the time the 70s arrived, there were no end of great little groups starting up. People were learning to play their instruments properly. They weren't just playing rock and roll and three chords. And people were thinking very seriously about making music and making better music and being more progressive in their thinking, and thinking perhaps less about being pop stars and more about being serious musicians. Mm-hmm. And I was no exception to that. I wanted to learn to play guitar to the best of my ability. When I was a little kid, I'm going to be the best guitar player ever. I will be the best. That's how you start out. And then you start to look around and you think, that kid in 4B, he's a better guitar player than me, but okay, I'll be the second best guitar player in the school. And then you go a bit further, and it's like you start playing gigs in town, and you think that, but I'm better than most of these kids. But actually, there's this guy in this band. Did I just hear that? Okay, I won't be the best guitarist in Swindon anymore. I'll settle for just carrying on in my own little way, trying to get a little bit better at what I'm doing and see what happens.
Apparently you did a good job, because from what I read, and tell me if this is true, you wanted to join Andy and Colin in one of their early bands, and they said, no, you're too good.
Oh, they didn't say that I was too good to my face. They didn't tell me that. I mean, they might have been being unusually kind, but I do remember going for a little blow with them. This would have been in 1976. So they were already. I think they'd lost the keyboard player, and they were wondering whether to replace him with a guitarist or with another keyboard guy. And there were very few keyboard players in Swindon who fit the bill. There were a number of guitarists. And at the time, I was working with a prog rock group down in the Forest of Dean, a three-piece prog rock outfit. Well, you can imagine in 1976, summer of 76, nobody wanted to know about prog. It doesn't matter how good you are or how well you play, unless you were already established. Even the established prog acts were being dismissed as boring old farts and having their skills ridiculed by these Tuppeny Halfpenny journalists. But I do remember going for a little jam session with them, and I thought, well, I've just come from this prog band, and I'm now into this arty new wave group, and I'm trying to find my thinking get my thinking into their way of thinking. Right. I'm not sure whether I'm actually going to be a very good fit.
So that was kind of my
really question. Was when the phone call came from Andy in early in '79, asking if I'd be interested in joining them after Barry Andrews had quit. I was astonished. Why? Surely you guys have got a record deal. You've got 2 records out. The world's your oyster. There must be keyboard players champing at the bit to get within spitting distance of that gig. But having known Andy and Colin and realizing how they're not the most motivated of people when it comes to practical issues like finding and contacting musicians and arranging auditions and getting people together in one place and forming and making choices. Let's just give Greg's a call, see what he's doing, see if he's interested, and we'll redesign the band. We've done 2 albums with this keyboard. Let's start from good. We got the songs. We'll just adapt them and see how and that's basically how it was. They were just too lazy to audition keyboard players.
Well, they obviously remembered how good you were. I mean, even if they didn't tell you, that's why they called you.
Well, Andy, there's a famous quote of Andy's that's at the time he said, you know, we all knew Dave, even if he was a sax player, he'd still be in the band. So it wasn't so much my musical skills. I think it was just the fact that we all got along. We all had a shared sense of humor. We kind of went to the same gigs. We bumped into each other at weekends in the music shops,
so you had known them for a number of years prior to getting the phone call and bringing you into into XTC. So that was
they knew that I was a fan. You see, because whenever I was at home and knew if the Helium Kids or XTC had a gig locally, I'd always go out of my way to go see them. I didn't see all the gigs they played, but it was interesting watching how they changed over the years, and how they how much better that I remember with they signed their deal with Virgin Records in 1977, and immediately that happened. Then they went out on a long tour. They called it the White Music Tour because it was basically working every night for about a year. And then they came back to Swindon to play a sort of homecoming gig. And the change in how tight and how focused they were as a band, I was astonished, because they were always a bit ramshackle. I mean, that's part of their charm in the early days.
Right.
But once they'd had gone out and built up their gig muscles, they were a formidable force.
Which you could relate that all the way back to the Beatles' early days in Germany and playing 5 hours a night, 7 nights a week, and
that's it.
And people said that they left Liverpool as just a ramshackle kind of, we'll do what we feel like doing, type of thing. Went to Hamburg and then came back, and people were just like, oh my gosh, what has happened? They just got.
It really toughened them up, that Hamburg thing, and I think the same thing happened with the band on the White Music Tour.
Yeah. And speaking of toughened it up, there's I saw an interview with you somewhere talking about you're the lead guitarist, but Andy's also a very good guitarist, and sometimes there would be a confusion as to who actually was playing what along the songs. But their first 2 albums had that very kind of tough, edgy guitar,
very
angular guitar, and there was the Barry's keyboards and things. So when you slid in there for drums and wires, it changed things with almost like a balancing act of what Andy was doing with the guitar and what you were doing with the guitar, because it weaved 2 very distinctly different ways of attacking the guitar that you both had, and it made for just a complete a wow moment with drums and wires.
Yeah, I think that maybe one of the problems with Andy and Barry was that they both had a very similar style of playing. It was all very angular and spiky and rhythmic, and it's a little bit it was exciting to watch and listen to, but I don't know how much longer they could have continued with those 2 elements constantly fighting each other. That's the way it sounded to me sometimes.
Right.
So I didn't change my guitar style that much. I just was aware that I was coming from a more, a less artistic attitude to the guitar. I was thinking more as the musician, thinking about sound and tone, whereas Andy was very much the creative force and the artist. And his guitar, he's never ever sort of shown any real interest in the guitar as an instrument. He would be an amazing jazz guitarist if he put his mind to it, but he just had no interest in doing it.
You were the arranger, pretty much, right?
Well, we all pitched in. Most of the albums were arranged in rehearsal, and so that's the reason why a lot of the albums have co-producer credits, was because really the producer's job ended up with being just kind of keeping the peace most of the time. That's not to say they didn't contribute.
Yeah.
Most of the work, most of the heavy lifting was done in rehearsal with the 4 of us. So when Terry was with us, and we would just go in 5 days a week, spend 6 or 7 hours with a lot of tea breaks, going over the songs. We have these little Ghetto Blaster cassette recorders, and we'd record. We ready to tape this song now? Yeah, well, okay, let's go into record then. That'll do for today. Then you'd go home with your cassette, have your tea, put it on later on. Let's have a listen to what we did today then. What can we improve on what we've done? And it was just a question of just building the thing up with whatever ideas came to hand. And like I said, we didn't have a lot of time to worry about too much. I'm thinking now of the first couple of albums that I did with them, Drums and Wires and Black Sea. Both of those were written and rehearsed very quickly by modern standards. We had a bit more time.
Also, the guitar solo parts you had said were also very precisely figured out. You didn't go in there and just kind of wing it at the moment. You guys knew exactly what you wanted to do, and you rehearsed that and got it to fit what was needed with the song very precisely. And when I first heard Reel by Reel and your solo and that's when you said getting the sound, and that really defined that album. Just had a sound to it that for the time when I got it was so different.
Cool guy. Ugh.
Just
why does he always show up now?
Oh, he has to let the pool guy in.
Pool guy, of course, he's in LA, of course.
It's let the
pool. The other half lives, eh? Cool,
but Drums and Wires. Not only did I was the kind of guy that went to the record shop and just started flipping A to Z, and pulling out albums many times just by the artwork. And even though I knew the first two XTC albums, that artwork jumped out at you. I was like, whoa, new XTC album. And then the music just slayed me. You talk about your Beatles moment or whatnot, but man, that I get chills thinking about the day I brought that home and put it on the turntable, and just blew me away. And
that's fantastic. And I have to say, I always liked that logo on Drums and Wires because it looks like the music sounds in a way. If you can understand that, it's sort of it was appropriate.
Absolutely.
For that record.
Absolutely.
And I still find I still enjoy. It's one of the few records that I can put on and still enjoy listening to, because it isn't a hi-fi production. It is it was done in a hurry. I think we spent 3 weeks from soup to nuts. Once soon as it was done, we were out on the road, and the record came out about 4 or 5 weeks later.
Are you talking about Black? You're talking about Drums and Wires or
Drums
Black?
And Wires.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was just talking about how the sound, it just sounded so different from anything else that I was buying and hearing at the time, and it just the sound killed me.
Dave, what kind of ambition did you have as a band? Did you want to be like the hugest band, or did you just want to go out and tour and play, and whatever success came, that would be great?
Well, we were very ambitious, extremely ambitious, and that's why I think we agreed to be sent to all 4 corners of the globe, playing in the most unlikely of places, just for the fact that we were on the road and we had to do it, and this was the whole thing. We were young and daft enough to and energetic enough to undertake these pretty severe tours. I mean, they were hard work. The first American tour that I did with the band, which was in January, February 1980, middle of winter, and we did it all in a Dodge minibus. Wow. Overland. I think the little van covered 13,000 miles. There were a couple of flights, not many, but we did at least we had beds for the night. It wasn't like we were sleeping in a van, and that made it tolerable. But it was hard work, and we were glad when it was over, because it was exhausting. And Andy did. I think he did have a little bit of a breakdown on that tour towards the end. But you go home, have a few hours. Well, you get more than a few hours sleep. Get a good night's sleep for a couple of weeks, and then you're ready to do it again. Yeah. And we were ready. We're always looking forward to what was coming next.
But this was kind of the beginning of Andy's difficulty with touring.
He didn't really show any signs of difficulty until I think the middle of the end of 1980, after the Black Sea album came out, and we'd done a lot of work. We did an American tour, we did another Australian tour, and I think he was just really starting to think, why am I doing this? Because you have to remember as well, we weren't seeing any money from all this work.
Yeah.
And even though it wasn't important at the time, it became very important later on. And it took us forever to sort it out. But anyway, that's.
Were you enjoying? I mean, the road though. Was it very just hard work, and you had something that you felt that you had to do because the label's sending you out, or were you enjoying yourselves playing live? Because you look at bands today, it's a whole different ballgame. They're not out there with labels behind them, and they're not out there playing every night or what. Those clubs just don't exist, and they give their right foot just to be able to do that now.
Yes,
and
that's right.
Back then, you got to do it. It's a different world. But were you enjoying what you were doing?
I think we would have enjoyed it more had we not been worked so hard. We needed. I'm still astonished at how Colin and Andy found time to write those songs, because it was just like, once you've finished a long tour, all you want to do is go home and rest and stay rested until someone literally kicks you back into action. But with Andy in particular, he never stopped writing and creating and thinking about the next album and what was coming next. That's all he wanted to do. Eventually, he got so tired of having to drag his ass around the States or wherever it was, and not seeing any financial reward, and just not, and also the crowd thing, the applause, the shine of that kind of worn off. He wasn't so enamored of impressing a large audience, or anybody for that matter. All he wanted to do was go home, write some songs, write his demos, get in the studio, start creating and making more records.
So many parallels with one of his idols, Brian Wilson.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know whether, well, the thing when Andy told us that he really didn't want to tour ever again, and he couldn't face touring again, he'd say, well, look, I don't want us to break up. We can keep making records. Other bands have done it. The Beatles didn't tour. Steely Dan didn't tour. Brian Wilson stayed home and that's what I want to do. Now there's MTV. They can help us out. We can make videos and let MTV do all the promotion for us. And we thought, oh, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure that's such a good idea. But then again, it's what's going to preserve Andy's health. And keep him creative, because this was the thing. It was like chopping up the golden goose. That was kind of what was happening at the time. They'd being overworked. I think what passed from management at the time decided that this wasn't going to last forever or very much longer. Let's keep these buggers out on the road and keep milking them until they dry up.
And when you think about it, you didn't. You talk about the financial side of things. You were out there busting your hump, trying to promote, trying to play, and you're not making any money. So it's not like you had such a massive hit that the money was rolling in, and here's your pad that you can at least count on. If it all, you were just in that everyday struggle just to survive while things were going on. And you can see after a couple of years of doing that and saying, where is the gold at the end of the rainbow?
It's kind of like Badfinger.
I can't keep doing
has
this
the same
forever.
Situation, as you may know.
Yeah.
Unscrupulous manager, just keeping.
Yes. No, well, it wasn't quite as tragic as Badfinger, but you can see how that kind of thing happens and what can happen in a really worst case scenario.
Well, yeah, and then, as you said, to stay as creative as Andy and Colin did in creating, the next number of albums, and the way the band grew with that as well is really amazing. It's really amazing.
It is.
Speaking of Badfinger, this dovetails nicely with, maybe I should have waited a few minutes to ask this, but since we mentioned Badfinger, Todd Rundgren, of course, had partially produced Straight Up. You were a big fan of Todd Rundgren's work, and I guess it was you who suggested that he come and produce Skylarking. What was it like working with him? Because you hear a lot of different stories about different reactions from different people.
Well, the thing is, the stories about Andy and Todd not getting along, that seems to be the central theme of the Skylarking album, which is completely, it's kind of, it's a bit misleading, because it's true, they didn't get along. They were two very determined people. The irresistible force meeting the immovable object and all that. But, Todd, to me, it was another dream come true to work with the man and just to meet him, because I was his biggest fan and I'd been listening to his music. I was late to it, I have to admit. I didn't. It was Hermit of Mink Hollow that turned me really onto him.
Yeah.
And then I sort of worked my way backwards from that record and just became completely immersed and just aware of his genius.
Yeah.
And I'm still, it's just, and every time I hear his voice, I think, why is this guy not ever, or very seldom, recognized as one of the great voices of the 20th century? It's just a fantastic vocalist, and his sense of melody and harmony in his writing, it's astonishing. And the fact that he should even have the slightest interest in our little project, that was amazing to me.
Yeah.
So when his name came up on a list of producers who were putting their names forward to produce this next album, which we had no title for and only a handful of songs at the time, I just said, we can't pass this opportunity up, Andy. Come on, let's do this. Because it might just be a one-off. You never know. It's going to be an adventure, whatever happens. And luckily, I was able to talk him into it. I think it was the fact that he'd worked, Andy knew that Todd had worked with the New York Dolls, who were one of his very early favorite bands, and that the album that Todd did with them was one of his all-time favorites. So he was curious to meet the man and see what made him tick.
What did you think of him as a producer for Skylarking? Did you get along with him well?
Yes, no, I had no issue with him. I was overjoyed to be just in the same room as the man. And he made some really, really cool suggestions and carried them through. Like, for example, The Man Who Sailed Around His Soul, which was just a little acoustic guitar song that Andy had, that he built up into this sort of 1950s spy theme that he put on it. And Prairie Prince's drumming on that, which is astonishing. Prairie really delivered with that one, as he did on the whole album. But I think as an album, it's just a great listening experience. Again, like Drums and Wires, it's got its own sound. None of our other albums sound like that.
Did you guys resent that? Was it Virgin that wanted to include Dear God after it became a hit? Did you resent them doing that, or were you fine with it?
Personally, I was happy. I was just happy that the album came out and it was finished. It was Andy basically Todd said to Andy, Andy wanted to this song called Another Satellite on the record, and it wasn't part of the demos that Andy had sent Todd, so it messed up his running order. Todd had already planned the album from the demos. Of
course he did.
So Todd said to Andy, look, I can't get Another Satellite and Dear God on side 2 of the album. There just isn't room. So one of them's got to go. So it was put to the record company. Here's the situation. Andy wants Another Satellite on the album. What has to go? And I think that they made the decision that Dear God was going to be taken off and put on the B-side of the first single, which was going to be Connie Moulding's song Grass.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was a disc jockey in LA. I can't remember who it was. Decided he flipped the record over to play the other side. And of course, there was this child singing the opening verse and this controversial lyric about religion, organized religion, basically, is what it's.
Right, yeah.
And he decided that this picked up a lot of turntable time, and people were phoning in and curious about this band. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know where the album was that this song could be found on. Well, it was on the back of a 12-inch 45. So Geffen Records went into a panic and recalled all the original pressings and reinstated it. And I think then Mermaid Smiled was taken off, which I was heartbroken about, because that actually is my favorite song on the album. I had virtually nothing to do with it. It was all Andy, and I just, it's a little piece of poetry, and the way it's
beautiful,
it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, indeed.
All I did was, I think, duplicate the little acoustic guitar motif on the Fairlight with the marimba thing. But I didn't.
It's interesting, the genesis getting to Skylarking and with Todd's involvement, because we've kind of glossed over after Black Sea English Settlement. You started to see a little bit more production value in some of the tracks going on. Senses working overtime, Snowman, and then you get to Mummer, and you have Love on a Farm Boy's Wages, which starts to get more involved and maybe not as angular and with the but then it all comes to a head, not only with the songs from Skylarking, but with the production from Todd, and it changed the palette of everything as far as XTC is concerned. And it was another, most people have a wow moment with a band, like I said, with me with the early XTC, but then you get a re-wow moment when you hear headphones on in Skylarking, and it just completely, it's like wow.
I used to exercise to that album. In '87, in early '87, I went on a very strict diet, and one of my favorite, I had a Sony Walkman, put the cassette in. One of my favorite albums to exercise to was Skylarking. I'll never forget.
Well, and
move over Quincy Jones. I've never heard anybody tell me that it was a great album to exercise to.
Oh, that's really Supergirl. I mean, that has a rhythm of being on a treadmill or on a bike. It's perfect.
Well, as Nigel chimed in, he said the gem of a solo on Supergirl is so Todd it blows his mind. That's absolutely true. Coming from so now Skylarking is out, and were you really happy though with the end product and how XTC was now, what this is representing for the band?
Well, for me, actually, once the album was out, it was a relief, because Andy had got such a downer on the record as a result of his disagreements with Todd, and he kind of, I have to say, he took the shine right off any joy we might have. I mean, all right, the album came out, it got to number 90 in the British charts for 1 week and vanished. Yeah. So it's a kind of like, well, maybe Andy's got something then. Maybe it is because of Todd that the record didn't sell, or whatever it was. But of course now, look, it's more than covered its costs. We've made money off it, God knows.
Oh, sure.
And people are now, like yourselves, are sort of holding it up as a major.
Wonderful. But did it lead you to revisit? Because I know one of the names that you bandied about early on was the Dukes of Stratosphere, and now did Skylarking, did it serve as an impetus to get you to revisit the name and the whole 60s thing?
Actually, I was coming to that, because the Dukes of Stratosphere's first EP, 25 O'Clock, was done prior to Skylarking.
Oh,
and that was done
I didn't know that.
Yes, that was released in April of 1985.
Oh, wait a minute, of course I knew that. That was
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And I actually sent a copy of it to Todd's management. And because he'd come to, Todd had actually come to visit us when we played a show at the Chicago Park West on the 1981 tour, which is the last American tour we did. And Todd showed up in the dressing room after we just finished our set. He raced over from a Utopia gig he was doing in the other side of town just to come and say hello. I couldn't believe it. What's this? It's the man in our dressing room. And all we could offer him was there's a little few crusts of white bread and some bottles of water. That was our rider. So he wasn't too impressed with that. But it was just the fact that he bothered to come across town and see us out was just astonishing. But he then went with Utopia and did the Deface the Music album, which was like a sort of send-up of a really clever rewriting of sort of some Beatle favourites, which I loved, incidentally. I know a lot of people poo-pooed it, but I thought it was really great. And so as a result of hearing that, I thought, well, maybe you'll like this thing we've done where, okay, Todd, how many bands wrong with this record can you find? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I sent it off to his management. Didn't hear anything, didn't hear a word. But he may well have heard it and thought, well, yeah, maybe these guys would be fun to work with after all. So it was really, Skylarking is the Duke's sort of progressive rock attempt following 25 O'Clock. Because after Skylarking, we then did Sonic Sunspot.
Right.
Which is absolutely brilliant, by the way.
They were certainly a lot of fun to make. They were more fun to make than Skylarking was, let's put it that way. And I'm not sort of blaming Todd for that.
Right.
No, but it was just a different, without Todd, you did, or Andy could do what he wanted to do. And he probably just enjoyed the process other than just bashing heads with somebody that he didn't agree with. But they're both, they're brilliant works in and of itself. It was some of my favorite things.
I thought 25 O'Clock was very prog because there were a lot of long songs, extended solos. And then Sonic Sunspot comes out and it's these shorter, really kind of silly songs that were just, they worked so well.
That's what it always began. It starts and ends with the song, regardless of how you treat it. And this is where we were so lucky with someone as creative as Andy was in particular, and Colin as well. Give him his due. He could write a great melody. He came up with the goods time after time. Between them, we never had a dry spot in terms of lack of inspiration or material. That's why the band lasted as long as it did.
Sure. And then what was the thinking then going into Oranges and Lemons? Where was the band? What was, you just had or Andy had a bad experience, so to speak, with Skylarking. What was the thought process now?
I'm trying to remember the exact circumstances at the time. That would have been 1987, 88.
Right.
We were asked. Yes, I think our A&R man at Virgin Records in London, Jeremy Lascelles, wanted us to work with another American producer, because he said, we've sort of breached the dam in the States here with Dear God. It's a bit controversial, but people now know who you guys are. So we need to continue that momentum and get an American producer. So I'm going to send this young guy down to meet you. He's a huge fan. He really, really loves you guys and wants to work with you. To have a meet with him and see what you think. And so Paul Fox came to visit us at Andy's house in Swindon. And he was a really nice fellow. And very, very enthusiastic and young enough to be, on the scene, as it were. He wasn't like an old fuddy-duddy producer. He was up and coming and very, very keen. So he basically talked his way into the job, and we liked him. And he also offered us a fantastic deal on a studio in LA, which his manager owned. This little place called Suma Sound, which is up on Sunset. Yes, it's on. Was it Hollywood Boulevard?
Yeah. I've passed it. I know it.
Is it still there? I think someone told me
I haven't been there recently, so I don't know.
No.
But
I've got a feeling it's been
at the time.
But anyway,
should have stopped in.
He said, you know, what we need to do is we'll record all the drums at the big studio at Ocean Way. We can probably afford to spend a couple of weeks in there to get all the drum tracks done, and then we can just take the tapes and overdub at Rick's place, and you can stay there as long as you like. And so that's basically what we did. We ended up working on that record for 5 months. And it was, again, an amazing bunch of songs we had. And of course, we got Pat Mastelotto to play drums. He was a guy from, at the time, had just left, or I think Mr. had just broken up.
Right, yeah.
And he was sort of looking for work. And he was just perfect. We went to Leeds studio to rehearse with him. We walked into the studio, and half the place was filled with not only his drum kit, but a whole bunch of electronic stuff. He had like a mixing console, his own mixing console, recording thing set up right next to his kit. He had every song mapped out, absolutely per the demos. And in fact, he was better prepared than any of us were. And we got on with it, Pat. And I'm still love Pat. We're still friends.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've been to him now every time. I think I've been to more King Crimson shows in the recent years than any other band. And it's always down to Pat. You know, he's such a nice, friendly guy and a super talented drummer. Really, really, it's great to have someone that talented who's a really good person. And
what's your pick off that album, Oranges and Lemons? What's the Dave Gregory track off of that you go, that was the one I really enjoy?
Well, I can't really level it down to one. I have to say, I grew tired of the album very quickly because we had to go out and promote it with this acoustical radio tour. You probably remember we did a tour of little radio stations with acoustic guitars, trying to do these campfire versions. It was an early attempt at the unplugged thing that happened in the 90s. And so my love for that record wore quite thin quite quickly. At the time that when it was first mixed, it sounded great. It would have that big Hollywood glitter all over it. It was up to the minute production wise. It sounded really glossy and lovely, and it was exactly what we wanted. But you know that it kind of, after a while, I just got tired of listening to it.
Just had to shift it, really. Yeah.
When Stephen Wilson remixed it for 5.1, he did a new stereo mix, and I fell in love with it all over again. And,
that's one of the greatest reissues anybody's ever done.
I think it is. I think he did the most amazing job with that.
Not only that, but the whole album instrumental mix was such a revelation for me too. I heard so many things.
There's one hell of a lot of stuff going on. There's an awful lot of stuff you can do in 5 months.
Yeah, I have to tell you. I mean, I have tons and tons and tons of records, and but one of my top 10 songs of all time, and I mean just top 10, is Chalk Hills and Children.
Yeah, that is a beautiful song.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. I remember Rodney Bingenheimer, who you probably know of, or at least know from K-Rock. He had Brian Wilson on just after Oranges and Lemons had come out. And at that time, Brian wasn't talking much. You know, you'd be lucky to get more than a yes or no. Yeah. He played Chalk Hills and Children for Brian. And then he said, Brian, Andy Partridge, he wrote that song and he's a really big fan of yours. And Brian just said, yeah.
Not a few words.
Yeah, back then he surely was.
Hey, but at least you got a yeah.
He was like, it was like Rain Man almost at that point. But
well, that's similar. But we must have that effect on people because we went to see in 1988 just before we left for the States to do Oranges and Lemons, we were contacted by a couple of guys from Frank Zappa's touring band, Mike Keneally and Scott Tunis. And they called up, they were big XTC fans and wanted to meet us. I think this was another of these amazing moments I didn't see coming. So long story short, we went to Birmingham, the NEC at Birmingham, to see the Zappa band, which were on their last European tour. This is, the last tour that Frank actually did with the band. And I took some records to sign, and on the off chance that I might be introduced to Frank. Anyway, after the show, we met Mike and Scott, and we're backstage, and there's this whole kerfuffle because Frank leaves his dressing room and he's making his way through the crowd to the tour bus that's waiting for him. And Scott went up to, Frank, I'd like you to meet my friends from England. This is Andy Partridge and Dave Gregory from XTC. Frank, without breaking his stride, just went, muck.
Oh my God.
I didn't get an autograph.
Yeah.
I was going to say, did you get the autograph on the album? Was there, while we're in that vein, was there any other stories of people that you were surprised knew of XTC and what you were doing? You talk about, we talk about Brian Wilson, and we talk about Zappa, and you talk about the fans of XTC, but did you hear from anybody else that you went, wow, they know we exist? And
I can't think of any offhand.
Yeah, but there's got to be a lot. There's got to be a lot of, I'm sure half the people we interview here are all, they all put XTC as, in their top influences, period,
I'm told that we're the talk of the Hollywood recording studio scene. I don't know. I can't understand, why we suddenly are now at our age. Because the records, as I said, they were not big sellers.
No,
they weren't hugely influential at the time.
But they got lots of radio play, though.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily on top 40 stations, but on FM radio all over the place. And this is one thing. And Mark will attest to this. This is one thing that, when we speak to bands, they all have in common. They have no idea, especially years after the fact, they have no idea how loved they were and still are. And they really can't believe it. They said, why would anybody care about our little band? And it's like, trust me, people care a lot more than you think.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to know, certainly. And I think probably had some of that love been shared at the time.
Yeah.
Things might have turned
too busy, though. That's part of the problem.
We were too busy. The three of us, for a good 15 years, the band was everything. It took precedence over everything. That's all we thought about, 24/7. Even, family issues and stuff were second to what the band was doing or was going to be doing. Probably paid a price for that. I don't know. But we were very much in our own little bubble. And still kind of that's what our lives were.
Did you have a family yourself?
I don't know. In fact, that's probably the way that I was able to survive the lean years when there was no money, because I only had myself to take care of. I didn't have a family to feed. Had I had wife and kids, I probably would have had to say, look, guys, I can't afford to stay here any longer. I'm going to have to go out and get a proper job.
Well, Dave, I had a wife and kids, and that made me not be able to afford.
I have a wife, no kids, and she makes more money than I do. So
you're pampered.
David and I would right now just like to volunteer. If you have no idea where to send all your stuff when the time comes to get rid of it all,
we'll take it.
We'll help you out. It's not a big deal. But as you approach really what became like the final XTC album with Nonsuch, did you know that this was winding down? Did you have an idea, or were you just going on to the next thing? What was the feeling, at least from your standpoint? Going into that?
Yeah, no, not the Nonsuch sessions, and I love that album, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah,
and I thought, it again didn't come entirely issue free, but it was a good record, and we had fun making it. But things at Virgin Records had changed. You know, a lot of the people in the A&R department didn't even know who we were. We weren't selling enough records to make us a priority, and we just kind of felt a bit sidelined by the company. Plus, you know, they owed us money from an audit that we put in place, and they were disputing some of the claims that our auditors had made, and so all that kind of business stuff is kind of not very good. So we were already thinking, look, it's time we went to Virgin and got this contract cancelled because they're not helping us. And to be fair, we weren't touring, we weren't doing anything to promote ourselves, so we weren't flavor of the month at Virgin either. Anyway, the upshot was that we did get out of the contract, and we wanted to start our own record label and have an imprint of our own that we could then license to majors, and then we'd do a sort of record deal like that rather than be nailed down to some stingy royalty deal, which was, you know, what has kind of kept us, you know, that's kind of like all bands, you know, they all have to suffer this. But the thing is, our contract had been upgraded a few times in the years we were with Virgin. It hadn't moved that much. We weren't getting paid very much, and there was always some reason why we weren't being paid the full rate, because of CDs, because of compilations, because of you know, every page of the contract there'd be a reason why you weren't going to be paid. So you know, we just had enough of that, and so we thought, well, surely we've got enough of a name for ourselves now where a major label would be quite happy to license our stuff and give us an advance and pay us on a profit share basis or something similar, like a 50-50 deal or something like that. Well, that turned out not to be the case. Nobody wanted to know. So we'd left Virgin, we'd set up this Idea Records thing with the three of us. And the three of us were kind of directors, whatever that means. And but no, there were plenty of people ready to sign the band, but they just wanted a standard, stingy record company standard deal. Yeah. And we said, no, we're not going for that. Anyway, eventually, I'm just trying to think. Oh, yes, that's right. We signed a deal with a company called Cooking Vinyl, which was an independent label in London. Then they did a deal with a Japanese company called Pony Canyon. Pony Canyon were the people that supplied the advance to make Apple Venus. And that was how that whole thing. So really what Cooking Vinyl did was take a cut of this money from Pony Canyon to us. They took some, I don't know, 15% or something or other off the top. And then there was this other, it was all very messy, but at least the record was being funded. And so that's basically what we did. We had to find a way of, because Andy, again, he'd written so much stuff in the 7 years. We went on strike until they agreed to either release us or settle this debt. And so loads and loads of songs, both from Andy and Colin. Must have been about 30 songs, which meant that he wanted to do a double album, orchestral album and a rock and roll guitar-based album. And I thought, well, yeah, that's fine, but wouldn't it be better to just take the best of both of these, put them on one album? That way we can afford to make this record, because we haven't got the budget to do 2 albums the way you work, which is very, very slowly.
Right.
So that was the beginning of the disagreements, you know, and I kept having to remind Andy, look, we only have Hayden Bendel for so long. We've lost 6 weeks because of this wretched studio deal that you did with Matey, and the studio wasn't ready. It was wrecked, and we couldn't work. And now, you know, we most of the money seems to have vanished somewhere.
Yeah.
Not in our pockets, it's gone somewhere. And you still want to do these 2 albums. Well, when are we going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of problems, and then I started to lose patience with Andy because he was really being unreasonable, in my view. And so that was the beginning of the end for me.
Right.
Because I knew I wasn't going to get, you know, I wasn't going to get him to see sense. He'd made up his mind what he wanted, and as far as he was concerned, that was what was going to be happening.
Yeah.
And so that was the end of me.
But Dave, think about, I wanted to go back to something. Yeah, Virgin obviously was unscrupulous with you money wise, but think about this. You guys got to do 3 double albums, and it's not like you were selling billions of records. They let you do 3 double albums. That's really something that the label were behind you, at least in that way. They didn't interfere and say, no, we're not doing a double album. It's too expensive. You're only going to do a single disc. They let you do it. That's really awesome.
You know, it's true. That's absolutely true. And they didn't. The best thing they did for us was that they didn't interfere. They didn't send people. They didn't send some A&R twerp down to the studio to keep tabs on what we were doing. They left us alone to work. Right. They knew that we had sufficient fan base who would buy anything we do, and they would get their money back. Of course, you say they let us do a double album. They didn't give us 2 album budgets. We had to make a double album on a single album budget.
Okay,
so there was that. But then again, you see, they did have the manufacturing and shipping costs, which were, you know, twice as much as what they would normally have spent.
But you're true when you said they didn't interfere though, and they at least allowed you to do what you wanted to do.
You're so lucky in that regard.
Which is so lucky. We talked in the beginning of the show of this Chris Bond documentary that I'm talking to the maker yesterday, and Chris Bond was a producer for all the Hall & Oates stuff, but they brought him in for Klaatu. I don't know if you're familiar with Klaatu, but their 4th album, Endangered Species, and they brought him in and they said, we got to have a hit. So they brought in all studio musicians. They did it their way. And the guys came in, sang their vocal parts and went, back home, and completely, they took over everything, and they made a mess out of whatnot because they said, we're going to do it our way. It didn't, you haven't had the huge hit on the first 3 albums, but in your case, you had a core, fan base that was going to buy X amount no matter what you did, but you still weren't getting the monster hit, but they let you do what XTC does, and
that's
great.
At least that was
at least that was
well, we were very lucky in that one of the directors of Virgin Records is a guy called Simon Draper, who was sort of the head of A&R and one of Richard Branson's original partners. Right. He was a huge fan. That was our saving grace, because he did stick up for us, and he stuck by us even when we were really messing up big time. Simon would give us good advice and allowed us to carry on making records.
Somebody sent a question in. David said, will you ever officially release the great covers you recorded years ago?
Oh, no, they're not. Well, the original songs are great, but my covers, they're just a bit of fun, it's just something that I did. I had a lot of spare time, as you can imagine, with the band not touring and between albums. Didn't have that much session work. So I was, I just love making music and mucking about with tape recorders and just tooling around, and that was the result of that. And a lot of those, the remolds, as they're known, they're all songs that I grew up listening to and loving. And I just wanted to get my head inside the tracks, imagine what it might be like recording them for the first time, see how close I could get to the sounds on the original records. Just a daft idea of mine. But it was fun. I mean, I had no end of fun doing that.
And, the end of XTC was not the end of Dave Gregory and everything you did. You got involved with Big Train. which would kind of back to your prog love and roots, so to speak, and did some great work with them, and then a band called Tin Spirits, which was that the last project you've been involved with, or what was after that, or what do you got going on now?
Nothing's really going on now in terms of bands. I'm kind of disillusioned with the band. Well, look, I'm 70 years old. I don't have a future as a really, I'm not going to be forming any new bands, and except for maybe just getting together with some mates for a blow, maybe. I don't know, but I can't. It's just
maybe Andy and Colin. You just hang out in a studio somewhere, and
yeah. I mean, have you guys talked about a reunion album?
Well, XCC?
Yeah.
No, it's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. I wish it would. I mean, if this is a silly thing. It's just so utterly silly. The four original, well, not Barry Andrews, actually, he doesn't live in Swindon anymore. Terry, myself, Andy and Colin, we all live within 10 miles of each other.
Wow.
It would only take a phone call, wouldn't it, just to get us all in the same room.
Yeah.
And just at least just chat about old times and maybe doing something.
Yeah, and even if it didn't end up in you doing something, the four of you sitting in the same room and talking about your history,
just take a photograph
here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just
let me know when you do this. I'll come over. I'll take the pictures.
I think it would be amazing just to have, because we have a lot of fun, and we really appreciate you being here, Dave, and talking about these things. But that's the three of us, because David up in the corner, we weren't involved with it. So we go from but you guys are all right there. If you all got together and just had a couple of, well, we won't talk about pints and beers, because I'm diabetic as well. And I understand your struggles with that. But just, if you guys got together and just talked, would be wonderful. And
I'm happy to set up the phone call.
I'd love to sort of say, yeah, it could happen, but it just won't. Because
never say never. So sometimes certain people get changes of heart, and
I mean, think about this, Dave. In 1995, if you had gone up to all of your friends and said, "I'll bet you $100 or £100 that in 10 years, Brian Wilson will not only be out on the road touring, but he's going to revamp the Smile album, and he's going to tour that. I'll bet you $100 that's going to happen." You'd be a billionaire right now, because everyone would have said, "That's never going to happen.
Never going to happen.
Impossible." So you can never say never. I mean, I'm not trying to get my hopes up here. I realize it's not very realistic, but stranger things have happened in this business.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, I've seen. I know Andy. I mean, he's still very busy in his little shed recording. I mean, he's moans all the time about not being, people not buying his music, and he's not being. It's just no one even knows where you are, Andy. What are you doing? You're just hidden away in your shed. No one knows what you're doing. He put out this little Christmas EP last Christmas. Marvelous Christmas songs that he just sort of wrote. I imagine he just wrote them in his sleep. That's kind of how he works. And one of them was just delightful. I had his daughter singing, and she has a fantastic voice. And I was just thinking, why aren't you out promoting this? This is just amazing.
I almost had his daughter at his daughter's band almost played at International Pop Overthrow one year. It didn't quite happen. But I hope it does, because you're right. She does have a beautiful voice.
Yeah.
Dave, what did you think of the documentary of This Is Pop?
Oh, yeah. They did. Well, first of all, I'm very glad it was made, because I didn't think anyone would have the slightest interest in a band that did everything it could not to promote itself. But no, it was more. Could have been better, because it didn't they didn't interview any of the producers. The drummers weren't interviewed apart from Terry. There was a whole bunch of stuff that was left out. I gather there was a really interesting conversation with Stephen Wilson while he was rejigging some of the Skylarking tapes, and all of that was sort of glossed over or cut out. I mean, to be fair, look, it's a long career that we've had.
Yeah.
He only had so much time. I mean, I think to get television time of 80 minutes was quite an achievement.
Yeah.
And yes, Andy's the most entertaining of the three of us, and he deserves his place in the spotlight, I've no doubt. But there was a lot more to the reason the band continued to grow than just Andy's songs. I'm sorry I have to say it, but there was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can get a sense of your tone that, I mean, you probably love Andy in many ways, but there are things about him that, great on you and probably always will. But, what I don't hear is, how was your relationship with Colin?
Well, I'll give you an idea. I don't even know where Colin lives. I know he's in the area somewhere. He's out, I won't say where, but he's around. But we had a falling out about a number of things.
We don't have to get into it, but I was just, because you always talk about, obviously there was, a string of drummers and people that you used for that, and there was the three of you with, Colin, Andy, and you, and we hear you right here saying, Andy this, I this, Andy this, but we don't hear you talking about Colin that much, and I was just curious, whether through the whole working time with XTC and all the albums that you're involved with, what your relationship with Colin really was.
In the band, I never had a problem with Colin, and I don't think he had a problem with me at the time. And I've always been a big fan of his bass playing, and that was something else that wasn't even touched on in the documentary. It wasn't even mentioned.
Right. Yeah.
And he is a fantastic bassist. He's one of nature's bass players. The best musicians have a sound in their hands, and regardless of whatever instrument they've chosen, that sound will come through regardless of what instrument they're playing. And he's one of those guys with the bass. Yeah. And coupled with his ear for melody, that's a really great combination of talents. So it's always just I always look forward to what he was going to be playing on any given song. What's he going to be doing with this? Because these chords are might be just run-of-the-mill chords.
Yeah.
He'll do something with the bass that makes him special. And I also liked his singing voice. I think he's got a really, really sweet tone to his voice.
Yeah, it counterbalanced Andy's kind of
quirky.
Yeah.
It was a very, very good balancing act. He obviously wasn't as prolific as Andy, but then again, he wrote some of our best-known songs.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess there's people that the problems occurred between me and him after I left the band.
Right.
I'd insisted that when I went, they continued to pay me for the work that I'd done on the Virgin catalogue. I didn't want any money for Apple Venus or Wasp Star or anything beyond. That was down to them. I was happy I didn't take a penny for either of those, or the work that I did on those records. Mm-hmm. I just said, let's reach an agreement about how much I should be paid for the work that I've done with the band up to the point where I left. Absolutely. And I think that there's an element of resentment from him towards me. I mean, I'm speaking.
Yeah.
I can understand his point of view, maybe, but then again, he didn't contribute that much to Andy's songs either. It's just. Right. And
life is short.
I probably regret having said that publicly now, because that's not. It's kind of private, but I think that's probably at the root of what's caused a rift between me and him. I mean, we still communicate with via email. We have to, for business
purposes, sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's very obvious to David and I that you have a lot of respect for Andy and Colin, for what the three of you plus drummers have done throughout your career. It's an absolutely amazing career, and it for a bunch of guys from Swindon that ended up together and created the body of work that you did. I thank you for it, and it's something that is going to live on for a long time. And as I just said, life is very short and getting shorter for all of us. So I really wish that you guys could, even if nobody films it, could get together and just say, listen, we really did.
Absolutely.
Well,
and Dave, don't ever forget that your guitar playing, influenced those songs profoundly, and we're never going to forget that.
Well, thank you.
All the XTC fans out there, we're very grateful for what you've done.
Well, thank you very much.
There's a lot of us, more than you think.
Well, yeah, I guess there are. Well, thank you all, you lovely people, and for inviting me here to put my side of the story. And
well,
it's difficult, because my name is not in parentheses under any of the song titles on any of the XTC catalog. My stuff is kind of quite often overlooked. My contribution to the general, people might look at some of these songs and say, who wrote this? They won't see my name there. In fact, my name isn't even on the Drums and Wires album. There you are.
Right.
So it's I've kind of got used to being, the other guy. But as long as I've got a job, as long as I've got something to do, as long as I've got some music to work on, that's my gift.
Yeah. And what a gift you've given to all of us. And for those of us who know, we know.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you so much for being here, David. It meant a lot to both of us and to everybody who watched, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So we wish you health, happiness, and just keep being you, keep collecting this stuff and gathering more stuff and upgrade your house.
I went out and I found an original LP copy of None Such. So
nice.
That's the kind of collector I am. I paid some good money for it. So
I'm told it's yes, it does. It's actually, I think you can buy it now. It's been it's coming out on Andy's 8-plex.
Oh no, I have that too. But I had to have an original as well.
Yeah. No, I know it does change hands for big money sometimes, that record. Yeah, the vinyl.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Dave, and we wish you the absolute best. This has been a thrill. This has been a thrill, and
thanks very much, guys.
As a lifelong fan, thank you for the music and all you've done to make it what it was.
Thanks very much, fellas.
All right, stay well.
Super night. Thank you, Dave.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, that was fun.
There you have it, David. That was a bucket list item right there. Having
absolutely
Dave Gregory on the show.
And, let's give props to Mark. Mark was the one who set this up. Dave and I were Facebook friends, but we'd never really spoken. So, Mark had developed a relationship with him and asked him if he would do it, and he said he would, and here he was. So thank you, Mark, really.
Well, it's just an absolute thrill. And as you and I have discussed, we talked to a lot of people. We talked to a lot of musicians and authors and actors and writers and sports figures and things like that. And you have to ask. And if you ask, sometimes they're gracious enough to come on the show and do what Dave did tonight. And we really appreciate it.
I want to say, if you're a fan, which I know a lot of you are, of Oranges and Lemons, it happens to be my favorite XTC album. But for those of you who love it, and you don't have this Blu-ray edition of the Surround Sound series, you need to go get it. There's also a DVD edition, but that one doesn't have a lot of the stuff that this one does. And for me, the coolest thing, the 5.1 is nice, but I don't have a surround system. But the album in demo form and in instrumental form, is incredible. This is the first release that did that Yes, he really is a nice guy. This is the first release that did that, and it's astounding to hear an album like this, especially one so produced in instrumental form. You hear so many nuances that you couldn't hear with the vocals, and so if you don't have this, I don't know if it's still in print or how much it's going for, but if you don't have this, definitely find it. And if you don't have a Blu-ray player, yeah, go pick one up. They're cheap.
So just go do yourself a favor and get the entire XTC catalog.
Well, yeah, that certainly wouldn't hurt. And a few of the albums have been done this way also. Not all of them, but a few have. And but this one, for me, this one is it's Godhead, as Rodney Bingenheimer would say. But anyway, this was a great show, and we have some great shows coming up.
What do we got coming up, David?
Yes. Well, next week we have another icon in this here rock and roll business. She was an original member of perhaps the most infamous, I would say. Thank you, Gary. All-female rock and roll band of all time. That would be the Runaways. And we've got the bass player of the Runaways coming up next Wednesday on the 22nd, Jackie Fox. Yeah. And obviously she would have a lot to say about being in the band, but she's also done other things, including, she's a high-powered attorney, and was actually on Jeopardy and won several times in a row. So she was no dummy. Yeah, that's for sure. So I'd love to talk to her about that as well. You can see I think a lot of the Jeopardy appearances she has are up on YouTube, maybe all of them. So check that out. The following week, we have a mom of a couple of musicians, actually. The musicians are Christy and Kelly Callan from the LA 80s and 90s band Wednesday Week, who are really, really cool. Now, what I didn't know, her mom used to come to a lot of the shows they did, including the IPO shows Wednesday Week did. And every time I would see her, I would say, man, she looks familiar, but I don't know why. Well, I found out why a little while ago. She was an actress of some repute in the 70s and 80s, appearing on a lot of different shows. And she still does appear at age 87. There's that new show, Poker Face. That's what it's called, right?
Yeah, Poker Face.
With Natasha Lyonne. It's on what? Is it on Peacock?
Peacock, yeah.
I need to get the pay version so I can see more than the first episode. But yeah, our guest appeared at age 87 on episode 5.
Yeah,
and she's still sharp as a tack, and
it's going to be great.
Really nice lady. She goes by Kay Callan, and the K has no period. It's just K. Not even like Mr. T, which is Mr.T, as he likes to say. Now, Kay Callan will be our guest on the 29th, and that's really cool also. And coming up the next week, March 5th, we have a very, very special guest. Certainly not a stranger to any Paul McCartney fan, because he played guitar in McCartney's band for many years, and he's also had his own music. He's in a band called the Bayonets, which have a new album coming out, and he'll be promoting that, and we're going to help him do it. But yeah, obviously, being part of McCartney's touring band for all those years is what he's best known for. We're talking about Brian Ray. Yep. He will be our guest on March 5th on Material Issues. So we have some really cool guests coming up, and of course, all kinds of irons in the fire. I know some of you are saying, well, why can't we play Stump the Bash? I think we want these guests when we can get them. I mean, we'll certainly have shows where it's just
Stump the Bash or Dave Gregory. I think I'll take.
Yeah, we'll take Dave Gregory. I can't remember that commercial. That was on when this couple was going to win a prize for their house, and it was either a gift certificate or Ringo. And they both said Ringo. So we'll take Dave Gregory and the other guests that we're having coming up. But eventually, Mark and I will be doing a show by ourselves, and we'll talk about what we talk about. And we'll do a Stump the Bash or some variation thereof. But for the next 3 weeks, we're booked solid, and it's going to be great. So hopefully we continue to see you there.
Yep. And join us here on Facebook. Join the Facebook group. Subscribe over on YouTube at materialissues.com. Tell your friends. We have a lot of fun here on Material Issues, and we just like to talk, and we're easy to get along with everybody. We have a good time, but we thank everybody for tuning in, and we thank Dave Gregory for being a guest tonight. Just absolutely iconic guitar player for many years, and
yes.
Yeah, awesome show.
Yes, it was. So everyone, again, thanks very much for tuning in. We appreciate it every time you're able to do it, and everyone stay safe.
Yeah.
Stay safe. Have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we see you next week on Material Issues with Jackie Fox.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.